Hello there, YouTubers. Liver Flush Man here. Today going to talk about why most stones from the liver flush float in the toilet, in the water, and why they dissolve in open air. Right? So, first of all, not all the stones that come out in a liver flush float. There's also stones that sink. Sometimes, some flushes, you only get stones that float. And that is because there's two kinds of stones. There's calcified stones, and then there's fresh, uncalcified stones. The calcified stones are dense and harder, and they are formed with age. Usually they tend to be old stones, maybe in the liver for at least 10 years. I mean, it depends. It all depends also on rising bilirubin levels in the liver and blood, and the amount of calcium deposits in the liver as well, because the bilirubin and calcium cause the calcification process of the stones, and they've been in there a long time, and they harden. Calcified, they harden, and they get dense and heavy, and these stones are more damaging to the liver. Inside the liver, they rub, there's friction, they're moving around, and they're causing swelling and inflammation. They're irritating the liver inside the liver. Fresh stones that aren't calcified through the bilirubin and calcium deposits, they are less damaging to the liver. But they still cause congestion. Maybe a certain amount of stones is not necessarily, unhealthy, but a lot of stones where the liver is constantly inflaming and enlarging, and congestion liver with the lack of bile flow is, whether they're calcified or not, is causing problems for all parts of the body and all the organs, and everything's interconnected, and the liver being the master organ, like the engine of the car, with that, so you can imagine. So the two kinds of stones, calcified and uncalcified. Calcified stones typically tend to be darker in color, brown and black, and the fresh stones are typically yellow, green, and brown as well, but yellow and green. And there's typically layers too within the liver flushing itself. People that first start liver flushing, the first maybe few times to half a dozen or a dozen times is more typically the fresher stones and smaller. The first two flushes usually have smaller stones, and that's just because the liver is usually so congested that when it's trying to squeeze with the olive oil, small amounts of stones get expelled out of the bile ducts and into intestines and out your stools. But these layers, there's lobes inside the liver and pockets in the liver which actually can harbor and lodge different stones, different degrees of age of stones. So within the liver flush, typically once you've done quite a few liver flushes, then you may be getting to more calcified stones as well. And I mean, there's times where I've done the liver flush and then, past a bowel movement, and I mean, I could just hear the stones go boom and just hit the bottom of the toilet, like bang, just nail the bottom of the toilet. So, and those stones also, well, back to the reason why these stones float from the liver flush is because, typically the stones are fresher stones, and calcified stones are usually a degree to a sign that the liver is more further progressed in the liver disease. But these stones that float, the reason why is because they're made up of mostly cholesterol. I mean, cholesterol is a type of lipid, and also fats and cholesterol. So these lipids in the stones, they fat floats, right? So these lipids float, and the reason why they're green, and the pigments change. There's also red stones. I've heard people that have done my liver flush off of YouTube and reported a bunch of red stones. So there are different pigments, but typically bile, bile is a green pigment. So this pigmentation is part of what the stone is made up of too, as well. Cholesterol, fats, proteins, right? Proteins as well, and you got bile salts, and so the protein and bilirubin too, bilirubin stones, which are the calcification. So that's why they float. Alright, they float because of the high lipid content inside the stone itself, and the calcified ones because calcium causes the calcification and bilirubin, and it hardens and densifies and gets heavy. These ones sink because of the high calcium levels inside. So and then as far as the liver stones dissolving in open air, like, you know, some people think that because they do that, that they must be from the olive oil or they're not real stones. Well, actually, you know, because the reason why they dissolve in open air is because they oxidize. I mean, anything you take that's not an organic living thing and it's got water in it and there's content of water, like, it dissolves in open air, right? It loses its form, it oxidizes. So nobody's saying that they shouldn't dissolve. I mean, real stones that were surgically removed, you know, also dissolve in open air.